In a sealed reliquary chamber beneath the Fortress of Sicarius on Daedalon IV, 987 M37, a tech priest named Incar 9 records a wall inscription in the Minotaurs Reclusiam. The carving is Cretan, not Cretan-as-aesthetic, Cretan-as-language. It names a labyrinth, a bull, and a craftsman in a tongue that died on Terra in the 8th millennium before the Emperor revealed himself. The carving was made by the chapter's own founder, by hand, in M31. There is exactly one human being in 40,000 years of recorded history who walked the original Cretan labyrinth, and the Imperial Truth says he died at the Emperor's feet during the Siege of Terra. He did not. The chamber's location is sealed at a level the Inquisition itself has filed petitions to reach and been refused. We do not, in fact, know with certainty where the Minotaurs keep their oldest carvings, because the records of that chapter sit behind seals stamped by the High Lords of Terra themselves. But the iconography is canonical. Read Imperial Armour Volume 9. Read the Forge World account of the Badab War. The chapter is named The Minotaurs. The mobile fortress monastery, the relic-class heavy assault carrier that sits at the head of their fleet, is named the Daedalon IV, after Daedalus, the mythic Cretan craftsman who built the labyrinth that the Minotaur lived inside. The chapter's fleet flies in the shape of a bull's head. The Daedalon IV is the skull. 3 battle barges form the jaw. 8 strike cruisers form the horns. The armor is bronze. The colors are black and red. None of this is a coincidence, and none of this is canonical accident. Somebody designed this chapter, from the name down to the formation, around the central image of an Aegean myth that predates the Imperium by 7,000 years. And here is the question that the Imperium does not answer. Who in the 40th millennium would do that? Who in the entire recorded history of the Adeptus Astartes would build a chapter around a 4,000-year-old Greek story about a craftsman, a labyrinth, and a bull? You can think of exactly one candidate, the man who was actually there. His name was Ollanius Person. The Imperial Truth calls him Ollanius Pius, and the Imperial Truth says he died. Here is what we know about him from Black Library. Dan Abnett introduced the concept of the Perpetuals in his novel Legion in 2008 through the character John Grammaticus. A perpetual, in the canonical biology Abnett laid out, is a human being whose cellular regeneration is anchored to the soul rather than to the body. Damage the body and the body reknits. Destroy the body and a soul-anchored reconstruction begins. The body can be torn limb from limb, beheaded, vented into the void, eviscerated, shot at close range by hundreds of bolters, and in every case the Perpetual recovers.
We know this because Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamanders, is canonically a Perpetual. And Conrad Kurz, in the Heresy novels, conducted exactly that catalog of murders against him. Every one of them was reversed. Each death sent Vulcan back to his vigorous state and further enraged the Night Lord's master. Only the Fulgurite, a petrified bolt of the Emperor's own psychic essence, taken from the webway and refined to a single point of soul-killing energy, could permanently end Vulcan. That is the canonical baseline. That is what perpetual physiology looks like under attack. The body is a vehicle. The soul is the anchor. As long as the anchor holds, the vehicle rebuilds. Ollanius Person is one of the named Perpetuals. He is also, by his own reckoning in the heresy texts, approximately 45,000 years old as of the Siege of Terra. He was born around 15,000 BC in the city of Nineveh. That places his birth 7,000 years before the Emperor of Mankind is recorded as having walked Terra openly. Person is, in other words, older than the Emperor's first identifiable historical footprint. He is older than the Bronze Age. He is older than the Wheel. He has fought in every army worth mentioning across recorded human history. The Argonauts, the Battle of Austerlitz under Napoleon, the Siege of Verdun in the First World War, the Battle of 73 Easting in the Gulf War. He is, in the canonical phrasing, an eternal soldier, and always in the poor bloody infantry. He never rises in rank. He is always there. He is the man at the line. He is the rifle behind the sandbag. He is the soldier whose name never appears in the official histories because he has never wanted to be remembered as anything more, which is exactly the disposition that would make a man, given the chance to disappear inside an Astartes chapter, take that chance.
Now consider how the legend of his death has evolved across 40 years of Warhammer publishing, because the evolution itself is part of the evidence. In the original Warhammer lore of 1988, before any of this perpetual biology existed, Ollanius Pius was simply an imperial guardsman who placed himself between the Emperor and Horus at the climactic moment of the heresy. That image, of the mortal man interposing himself between his god and the rebel demigod, went on to imperial guard banners and became part of the iconography of the Imperium of Man. In 1993, the second edition rewrote the scene and replaced Pius with Sanguinius. For a long time, it looked as though the guardsman had been retconned out altogether. Later editions cycled through replacements, a Space Marine Terminator, then a Custodian, before the writers settled. What Abnett and James Swallow and Dan Abnett's successors did, across the long Black Library Horus Heresy series and into the final Siege of Terra novels, was reconcile the two readings. Pius and Person are the same man. The 1988 banner art saint is the in-universe propaganda fiction that Person himself consented to become, and we have textual confirmation. In The End and the Death Volume 3, published in 2024, Dan Abnett writes the actual death scene. Person asks the remembrancer Hari Har, an in-universe historian, to make his life story grander than life. Instead of just carrying a banner, he says, "Write it that I defended the Emperor against Horus." Person knows what is coming. He consents to becoming a legend. He chooses, in the moment before he steps into the chamber, the shape of the propaganda that will outlive him. That detail is small and easy to miss. It is also load-bearing. Person knew his death was being mythologized in real time.
He cooperated with the mythologization. A man who cooperates with the writing of his own martyr legend is a man who understands that the legend is going to be more useful politically than the truth, which is a strange attitude to take if you genuinely believe you are about to die for good. And it is the entirely natural attitude to take if you know, biologically, that you are going to come back, and you would prefer to come back without anyone looking for you. Then he goes to the throne room. Here is what the canon says happens next. The Emperor, accompanied by Garviel Loken, Litu, and the Custodes Proconsul Kaikaltis Dusk of the Heteron Guard, has fought through the burning city. They find Sanguinius's mauled and strung-up corpse in Lupercal's court. The master of mankind shows no visible emotion. Then Horus attacks the Emperor, and the Emperor falls. Loken, Litu, and Kaikaltis Dusk attack Horus to distract him long enough for the Emperor to rise. They are thrown aside by the energies of the confrontation. Then John Grammaticus and Ollanius Person teleport in, brought by Acti. Grammaticus uses a single line of enuncia to briefly push Horus back. Person runs to wake the Emperor and to deliver the Athame blade they have recovered.
Grammaticus is forced to flee. Person stands his ground. He unloads his lasgun into Horus. Horus, contemptuous, swipes him aside with the talon. He reduces Person to red mist. That is what the Black Library text says. But the records say otherwise. Because here is the question that ends in a place no canonical text wants to commit to. What happens to a Perpetual whose body is reduced to red mist? Vulcan was beheaded, eviscerated, vented into space, and recovered. He died until the Fulgurite came. The talon of Horus in The End and the Death is described as supercharged by all four ruinous powers, and there are commentators who argue this is enough to permanently destroy a perpetual soul.
But the talon is a demon weapon. It is not a fulgurite. It is not a specifically perpetual killing artifact. Red mist is biological destruction at a comprehensive scale, but perpetual regeneration operates at the soul level. The question of whether Person's soul was ended at the throne, or whether his body simply needed to do its longest reconstruction yet, is not answered in the published canon. It is genuinely open. And that open question is the door this video walks through. Now turn to Asterion Moloc. He is the current chapter master of the Minotaurs. His titles, as recorded in Imperial Armour Volume 12, are Master of the Minotaurs, Satrap of the Daedalon IV, Bringer of Wrath, the Brazen Warlord, and Spear of Judgment. He wears Artificer-modified Tartaros pattern Terminator armor. The Tartaros design is a relic pattern, developed in the closing stages of the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium. By the 41st millennium, Moloc's armor is 10,000 years old.
He carries a relic weapon called the Black Spear, a weapon of unknown provenance whose construction, the Forge World text notes, is similar in some regards to weapons of the Adeptus Custodes. That detail is worth holding on to. The Adeptus Custodes were the Emperor's personal companions. Their armory was handcrafted under the Emperor's personal direction during the Unification Wars. The weapons of the Custodes are not generally available to the rest of the Astartes. Moloc carries one anyway. Nobody explains how. He has died 7 times. Imperial Armour Volume 12, The Fall of Orpheus, documents the most recent in detail. The Orphean War opens in 991 M41 with the Maynarch dynasty Necron attack on the Orpheus sector. Moloc leads a teleport assault into the command vault of a Necron tomb ship. He kills the Necron overlord, identified as Makhtlan Kutlak in some sources, by stabbing him through the back with the Black Spear. The hall ruptures. Moloc is vented into open space.
His fleet reports him killed in action. They recover him alive.
And then, in the same passage, the Forge World text says, at least the 7th such incident over the last 5 Terran centuries, 7 recorded deaths, 7 recoveries, across 500 years. You can read that 2 ways. The first reading is the official imperial reading, that Moloc is one extraordinary man whose biology has carried him through what should have been 7 distinct killings. The second reading is the community canonical alternative, sometimes called the Proteus Protocol, that Asterion Moloc is a chapter master title and an ingrammatic personality construct, passed down between successive chapter masters along with the armor, the weapons, and the memories of the man before. On that reading, there have been 7 Asterions, not 1. The continuity is institutional rather than biological.
The chapter's apothecaries and tech marines would, over centuries, recover what they could from a fallen master's neural traces, imprint those traces on a chosen successor, and redeploy the same warrior the chapter expects to see step out of the gunmetal silence of the Daedalus Crata's command throne. The Imperium has the technology, if barely.
Ingrammatic transfer is a documented capability of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The record is contested. I am not going to resolve it. What I am going to argue is that one specific reading explains more of the surrounding evidence than any other, and that reading is the Perpetual reading. Because the Proteus Protocol explains the recoveries, it does not explain anything else. It does not explain why the Minotaurs were named for a Cretan myth. It does not explain why their flagship is named for Daedalus. It does not explain why the High Lords trust this chapter, and only this chapter, with the discipline of the rest of the Astartes.
It does not explain the sealed records. It does not explain the M32 appearance 4,000 years before the official founding. It does not explain why the Black Spear's construction resembles Custodes' work, when no custodian has ever been documented as supplying weapons to Astartes formations. The Proteus Protocol is a local explanation for one set of facts. The Perpetual reading is a global explanation for all of them. Because look at what else has to be true for the chapter to make any institutional sense at all. The Minotaurs do not have a homeworld. They are a fleet-based chapter. Their gene seed is described in Forge World records as chimeric, the standard imperial euphemism for tampered, mixed, or experimentally altered material. Their founding is nominally the 21st founding, the cursed founding, conducted in M36 under conditions the Adeptus Mechanicus has since refused to discuss. But here is the discrepancy.
The Departamento Munitorum records a chapter called The Minotaurs, operating in the M32 Solar Rebellion suppression. That is 4,000 years before the chapter was officially founded. The discrepancy is on the record. The Imperium has never reconciled it. And then the Minotaurs disappear from Imperial records in M38. They reappear in M41 with documented differences in behavior, in structure, in appearance, that the Departamento itself flags as anomalous. All data relating to the Minotaurs' origins and to the current status of their gene seed tithes is sealed by the highest possible authority. That phrase, recorded in the Forge World text, is doing very particular work. The Imperium has degrees of sealing. There is the seal of an Inquisitor. There is the seal of the Ordo. There is the seal of the High Lords. And then there is the level above that, the level that even an Inquisitor cannot, through the conventional channels, break. The Minotaurs sit there.
Their records are not merely classified. They are classified beyond reach. That is not how the Imperium normally treats one chapter among 900. The Imperium treats most chapters as line units, expendable, replaceable, recorded in a ledger. The Minotaurs are not in that ledger. They are filed somewhere else. Now ask yourself, what kind of chapter master would justify that filing? The Forge World account says the Minotaurs respond immediately and slavishly to directives issued by the High Lords of Terra themselves, circumventing other forms of imperial bureaucracy completely. The chapter is used as inter-Astartes disciplinary force. When other chapters need to be brought to heel, the Minotaurs are sent. They are the only Astartes formation routinely deployed in this role. That is an extraordinary authority. It is not given lightly. And it makes very little sense if the chapter's gene seed is genuinely chimeric and its political alignment is genuinely uncertain, because in that case, the High Lords would never trust the Minotaurs with the discipline of more politically stable chapters. The math does not work. Unless the master of the Minotaurs is someone the High Lords cannot replace, cannot question, and cannot easily refuse, because his standing precedes the High Lords themselves. There is exactly one such man, and the iconography, when you actually look at it, is on the record. The chapter is named for the Minotaur.
The Minotaur is the creature of King Minos, contained inside the labyrinth that the architect Daedalus built beneath the palace at Knossos. The flagship is named the Daedalus Krata, Daedalus's power, or Daedalus's realm, in the linguistic style of the Imperial Codex. The fleet flies in a bull's head formation. 3 battle barges form the jaw. 8 strike cruisers form the horns.
The skull is the Daedalus Krata itself, the relic heavy assault carrier so large that, of the recorded Imperial fleet, only the phalanx of the Imperial fists is larger. The armor is bronze, the Minoan metal, the alloy of the Aegean Bronze Age, the metal of the world that built the original labyrinth. The chapter's kill marks are recorded in lambda-shaped helican glyphs, the linguistic style of the Hellenic Bronze Age, not the Imperial Gothic that every other chapter uses. None of this is hidden. It is on the chapter's masthead. It is the chapter's identity. It is, in fact, displayed with a kind of polemic confidence, as if the founder were daring anyone to ask. What is hidden is the question of why. Why this iconography, on a chapter founded 35,000 years after the original Cretan Bronze Age, in a galaxy with thousands of alternative mythological vocabularies to draw from? The Forge World text does not answer that. The chapter's apocrypha does not explain it. The iconography is presented as a given, as if the connection between a fleet-based Codex Deviant Astartes chapter in the 41st millennium and a 4,000-year-old Cretan myth were so obvious it required no comment. Which it would be, if you knew who the founder was. And if you did not know who the founder was, it would be one of the strangest aesthetic choices in the entire recorded history of the Adeptus Astartes. And the audience completed the argument. The top single thesis comment on this channel's previous Moloc video, 14 likes, the highest engagement comment in our entire audience mining set on this topic, written under the parent video that proposed Moloc as the last Thunder Warrior, wrote, in its entirety, Asterion Moloc is Ollanius' person. A lot of the Minotaur imagery is based on his life. Minotaurs, the labyrinth, Daedalus, etc., that only he knew about. He was also the original Warmaster of the Emperor.
As Perpetual, there's many ways he could have come back even after Horus obliterated his original body. Of course, he keeps being recovered alive, because he's regenerating every time. That comment was written by someone who read the iconography and could see what it was for. It is not a fan theory in the conventional sense. It does not require any new piece of evidence, any unsourced novel, any extrapolated codex. It is an act of reading. The reading the comment supplies is the simplest reading that makes the iconography make sense. Person, the eternal soldier, was alive during the Cretan Bronze Age. He fought in armies older than the Aegean. He walked the Knossos labyrinth before the Bronze Age collapsed. The bull, the labyrinth, the Daedalus reference, these are not Cretan iconography in the abstract. They are the personal history furniture of a man for whom the Cretan Bronze Age was an ordinary year of service. If the founder of the Minotaurs decided what the chapter would look like,
what its formation would be, what its colors would be, what its flagship would be named, and if that founder were person, then every iconographic choice the chapter wears is a quiet, personal monument. Now consider the biology. The brief calls this the apothecarian problem, and the brief is correct to do so. The standard Astartes implantation process, 19 genetically engineered organs grafted onto a candidate over more than a decade of induction, beginning with the secondary heart and the os modula and ending with the black carapace beneath the skin, is destructive surgery. It rewrites the candidate at the cellular level. The original human dies in stages, and an Astartes emerges over the course of the rebuild. Most candidates do not survive even the first implants. Of those who do, almost all bear scars of the integration process for the rest of their lives.
The gene seed is not merely added to a human body. It rewrites the human body until the human is gone and a different organism stands where the human was. For a perpetual, however, the destructive aspect of the surgery is precisely the aspect that does not stick. Damage to a perpetual's body reverses. The implants would integrate. The original consciousness, the soul-anchored consciousness, would persist through the rebuild. What would emerge at the other end of the apothecarian would be a perpetual whose body is Astartes augmented. He would be taller, stronger. The black carapace would knit beneath his skin. The Laraman cells would patrol his bloodstream. The catalepsian node would let him sleep with half his brain at a time. He would be functionally identical to a space marine on the outside, and, internally, still Ollanius person, the eternal soldier. With a soul anchor that knows what the Cretan labyrinth looks like,
and what a Roman legion smelled like, and what the trenches at Verdun did to a man's hearing. That is the biology argument. It is speculative because no canonical text describes a perpetual undergoing Astartes implantation, but it does not contradict any canonical biology. It uses perpetual physiology as Abnet established it. The same physiology that lets Vulcan walk away from beheading would, on the same logic, let person walk away from being remade into an Astartes. The transformation is one way for a normal candidate because the original human is gone. For a perpetual, the original human cannot be gone. The soul anchor brings him back.
What you end up with is a space marine who is also Ollanius person. And there is no biological reason that body would not, given the chimeric gene seed the Minotaurs are recorded as carrying, present in Imperial records as a chimera of iron warriors and Imperial fists and custodes adjacent baseline material, which is exactly the genetic signature Forge World documents for the Minotaurs. The chimeric gene seed is not a defect, it is the diagnostic. Now consider what would happen on the throne room steps. The canon says Horus reduced person to red mist with the talon. The canon does not say what happened to the soul anchor. We do not, in fact, have a textual moment where any character confirms that person's soul was destroyed at that instant. What we have is the body destroyed. The soul question is open.
And in the only canonical comparison case, Vulcan, the documented perpetual, only the fulgurite, a specifically anti-perpetual weapon forged of the Emperor's own psychic essence, was capable of ending the soul anchor. The Talon of Horus, demonically supercharged by the 4 ruinous powers, is a different kind of weapon. It might be sufficient. It might not. The honest reading of the canon is that the question is not yet answered. What the brief offers, what this video offers, is the reading where the answer is no. Where the Talon destroyed the body but did not finish the soul. Where person reformed, somewhere, and the reformation was slow, the way the most extreme perpetual regenerations have always been described. And where, over 100 years and more, he came back to himself in a body that was reconstructed and a galaxy that no longer remembered him. 100 years is not a long time on the perpetual timescale. Person is 45,000 years old.
100 years to him is a deployment. 100 years for the Imperium, by contrast, is enough for an entire generation of historians to graduate, write the official accounts of the siege, get those accounts ratified by the ecclesiarchy, and die without ever doubting them. By the time person is in a state to take on a body and stand again, the Imperium has built the pious martyrdom into its catechism. The banner is everywhere. The saint has been canonized. The man behind the saint has nowhere left to return to as himself. He could not return as person. The emperor was on the throne. The Imperial Truth had built him into a banner art saint. To re-emerge as the guardsman who had died for the Emperor would have been to invite immediate inquisitorial attention, immediate cultic interest, and immediate weaponization by the political factions of Terra. The ecclesiarchy would want to elevate him to a confirmed living saint.
The Inquisition would want to interrogate him about every claim in the Pius hagiography, and any deviations they found would either be heresy or be revisions to the canon. Rival factions of the High Lords would treat him as a weapon to be claimed, or a weapon to be denied to the other side. The man would be torn apart politically the way the Talon tore him apart physically, only this time there would be no body to regenerate. The myth had become more useful than the man could ever be, so he needed a role the Imperium could not unmake. He needed a body whose unusual longevity would not raise official questions. He needed deployments far from Terra, in war zones the High Lords would forget. He needed a chapter that he could shape from the founding upward. He needed the Minotaurs, and the High Lords needed someone they could trust with the discipline of the Astartes, whose authority no other chapter could question.
There is no one else in the Imperium whom they could give that authority to.
The Custodes serve the throne directly and do not deploy on Astartes against Astartes assignments. The Inquisition uses individual operatives, not formations. The Sisters of Battle are the ecclesiarchy's enforcers, not the Astartes. The only formation theoretically capable of fielding disciplinary force against other Astartes is another Astartes chapter, and the only such chapter that the High Lords would trust with that authority is one whose master they know is the Emperor's oldest friend. The trade is symmetrical. Person gets the cover identity. The High Lords get the disciplinary instrument. The Emperor gets to keep his oldest mortal companion alive in the only role the Imperium can give a man whose biology will not let him die. What about the Emperor? Why would he sanction this? Why would he keep the secret? The answer is the answer the brief argues, and the answer the heresy makes plausible.
The Imperial Truth, after the siege, rested on Sanguinius's death and the Pius legend as twinned martyrdoms, the Primarch who fell facing Horus, and the mortal man who interposed his body between his god and the rebel. The two martyrdoms together became the load-bearing iconography of the Imperial Creed. They appear in the ecclesiarchy's earliest doctrinal texts. They appear on Imperial Guard banners across 1,000,000 worlds. They are not decorative. They are the architecture on which the Imperium's psychology rests. To admit that the Pius martyrdom was a propaganda fiction, that Person had not actually died, that the Perpetual, who was the Emperor's oldest companion, was alive and in command of an Astartes chapter on the galactic frontier, would have been to undermine the foundation of the Imperial Creed. It would have invited assassins from every chaos cult and Xenos polity in range. It would have invited cultic abduction attempts. It would have made Person a target the Emperor could not directly protect, because the Emperor, sealed on the throne, no longer has the freedom to move openly against threats to his oldest friend. Better, for both of them, to let the Imperial Truth keep its banner art saint, and to let Person keep his labyrinth mask. And the silence. Moloc's silence. The chapter's sealed records. The High Lord's refusal to discuss the founding is the cover. The seal at the highest possible authority is exactly what would seal the identity of a Perpetual who must not be found. The Inquisition is refused access because the Inquisition would, if it found out, treat Person as either a saint to be venerated or a heretic to be burned, and neither outcome serves the Imperium. The Imperial Truth and the Imperial Reality are not the same document. The Minotaurs are where the difference lives. This is the reading.
and I will say it directly. The evidence supports it. The evidence does not prove it.
The Imperium is not in the business of confirming things like this,
And Black Library is not in the business of resolving questions the long arc of the canon still has time to spin. But every iconographic choice the Minotaurs make is consistent with the reading. Every gap in the chapter's record is consistent with the reading. Every privilege the High Lords extend to them is consistent with the reading. Every documented impossibility in Moloc's biography is consistent with the reading. The reading is the simplest reading that makes the chapter coherent, and the audience reached it before the Imperium would. If Asterion Moloc is Ollanius Pius, then every Minotaur ever recruited has served a man their oaths name as the Emperor's first companion, and none of them know it. He stands at the masthead of a chapter the High Lords use as discipline enforcement against the rest of the Astartes, because there is no one else in the Imperium whom they could trust with that authority.
He buries his face behind a labyrinth mask,
Because the labyrinth is his memory. He has died 6 times that the records admit, and an unknown number that they don't. He will die again and reappear until the day the Emperor finally dies. On that day, possibly, so will he.